Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. So in this panel, we're actually going to be kind of exploring more of a platform, kind of how you do development, and talking a little bit about the choices of native, web standards, or hybrid. I mean, having done development for quite a long time, this is often a really tough choice for teams and for companies. Which technology do you choose? What's appropriate for your team? What's appropriate for the developers? And your target audience, like are there limiting capabilities that you have to use? But a lot of things have changed. And even having done this panel last year, I'm sort of very interested in kind of finding out the answers to some of the questions we have here, because really the landscape is in constant change. And there's a lot going on. So let's go through and just let everybody introduce themselves. We'll go ahead, and we'll start with Ben and work down this way.
All right. Hi, my name is Ben Garney. I run the Engine Company. We do an open source mobile app framework called Loom, loomsdk.com, and then consulting as well. I come from the game world. I spent about 6 or 7 years doing first desktop titles, technology for desktop games, then I moved to console technology, and then I did a couple years in social games before finally kicking out on my own and doing this, moving into the mobile realm. So now I'm a little more balanced between app and games, but my heritage is definitely games, and I think you'll probably find as we go through my answers will reflect that. So that's me.
Good. Perfect. Michael?
Thanks. Hi guys, my name is Michael King. I'm the Vice President of Enterprise at Accelerator. We do a mobile application development platform. It enables you to build, test, run, do all the things you would do through the software development lifecycle for mobile apps specifically. I've been in mobile for about 20 years. Started off as an RF engineer building networks. Ran through that for a while. Was a Gartner analyst for 10 years, and now I'm at Accelerator.
Great. All right, Jeff, go ahead.
I'm Jeff Hartley. I'm the head of products at a company called Sentia. We make a web-based application development platform that addresses both mobile applications as well as those that would run on desktops and browsers, or through various packaging schemes. I've been there for about 4 years, and made my first mobile app in 1995, which is actually an oil and gas data gathering app for guys that work out in the field. So been involved in that for a long time as well.
Interesting. Michael, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Michael Swindell. I'm the Senior Vice President of Products at Embarcadero Technologies. Although you may be more familiar with our heritage products, I've been developing software development tools for about 17 years. You might remember some things like Delphi, Borland C++, JBuilder. These are all products that led the development teams with. And most recently at Embarcadero, we have the Borland teams there. Embarcadero acquired all the tools division of Borland in 2008, and our latest development solution is called App Method, which is around building IoT or Internet of Things based solutions. And I guess our biggest claim to fame is that people credit us with inventing the IDE in 1983.
I used it quite a bit.
Yeah, little product called Turbo Pascal.
Yeah. Okay, so this is where the questions get really hard. There's a one-word answer on this question. It's going to go real quick, and then we'll go back through and explain why. Native, web, or hybrid? One-word answer. Ben.
Native.
Michael?
Depends.
That was not one of the words.
That wasn't.
It is a word.
Actually, the
It is
title
one
did
word.
have "and between" kind of off to the side, but okay, it depends.
I'd have to say it depends as well. We see both.
Okay, Michael?
Many different kinds.
Native.
Native. Native, it depends, native. And as a show of hands from the audience, and depends is not an option for you all. But I'd like to basically say anyone doing native development, just show of hands. Okay, web development, show of hands. Okay, and hybrid development. Wow. Okay.
See, it depends.
See, it was almost 50%, 50%, 40%. And so I think there were some hands up twice, which is rather interesting. Now, for the panelists, the hard question. Why? And you can explain between as well. Ben.
I'll be honest, depends. There are apps that are going to be appropriate for each tech. The things I like about native, you can have a lot smaller stack between you and the hardware. So, you bring in WebKit, you bring in standards, you bring in, especially if you're using system WebKit, a lot of potential variation amongst devices. It can all be surmounted, but for the kinds of apps that I want to build, it's a lot of extra work. When I want to put something on screen, I want it to be where I put it. I want to be able to do my own resize logic. I want to be able to control the interaction precisely and have a pair of it kind of running consistently. And so that's why, I veer towards the native side.
So I would say it all depends on the interactivity of the application. I use what's called the slope of interactivity when I describe this to people. On one side you have user interaction, the other side you have device interaction. As an application moves up that stack, you lean closer and closer. You go through web here, if it has low user and a low device interaction, to hybrid for medium user and medium device interaction, to native. And oftentimes that native is a much wider swath because there are frequently things that are not exposed to the web or the hybrid environments that you need to use with native. So native might be 70, 80%, while the rest might be 30 or 40%.
Interesting.
I think it's an interesting perspective, and we see the same thing. We notice that a lot of the applications our customers develop don't really need to be native. They could be web or they could be hybrid. It depends upon the sort of the distribution model you need and also the level of security you need around the app. Like there might be some apps that you don't really want to be exposed on the public web, maybe behind your firewall, it's okay. In some cases, if it's a consumer application, you might want to package it so it's distributed through the app stores, which is sort of the app acquisition behavior that the consumer is used to. And or in some cases, you may want to use, there's actually like alternatives like we actually offer a managed application runtime environment that allows you to distribute web applications, but in a secure manner through a native application, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
So similar to PhoneGap, but it's not packaged and distributed through app stores.
Gotcha.
It basically just kind of plugs into a container.
Okay. Michael.
I think historically this struggle has really been between vendor platform tools and cross-platform tools, and cross-platform solutions being around web and hybrid. And I think everybody's desire is to deliver the best user experience possible and as close to native as possible. And by native, things like user experience, size of the application, size of memory footprint, size of the deployment footprint. And mobile really drove the reemergence of the importance of native, at least from those benefits, from the user experience benefits, because we're talking about highly personal devices, things that we're touching and interacting with, very closely. And so that there was always this struggle between cross-platform benefits of cost of development, time to development across multiple platforms, and then the native benefits. Today, we build across both native and cross-platform. So we've got at Embarcadero, and with that method, we've driven to try and change the game. So it's not just a competition between cross-platform and native benefits. But I think internet with the emergence of Internet of Things and gadgets and sensors and much even smaller and smaller devices, that need for native in small footprint, highly interactive benefits gets even bigger and gets even larger. So that's we think native continues to deliver more and more benefits, especially as we start to branch out into smaller devices.
Interesting. So I'm going to go through one point that each of you brought up and just sort of trying to drill into this one a little bit more. Ben, you mentioned close to the hardware. How important is that for you? I mean, I know a lot of the things you do are graphics.
Right. When you're doing a touch-based experience, responsiveness is really crucial. You can certainly build web apps that are responsive, but the question is, how much effort do you need to put into optimization? How carefully do you need to set things up to achieve that goal of, maybe you need to have 60 hertz responsiveness for your touch to have it feel good. A game that I'm working on right now, we're just wrapping up, is a drawing game. You draw with your thumbs. So if it was a sign up for a session app, web totally would be adequate, right? But with this, if it feels laggy to draw, people aren't going to play it. So getting really intimate with the touch APIs and tuning it well is important. So that's a great example, I think, of a case where close to the metal has a really direct impact on the viability of the application. So, not every app's going to fit that profile, but when you're living in that space and doing these kinds of, touch responsive apps, it can be a make or break.
Interesting. Now, Michael, you mentioned the slope of interactivity, and I wanted to touch on that. How have you seen it change over time? Because I've watched Appcelerator's approach change in time to keep up with the market, and I was just wondering your take.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I think if you looked, even 2 years ago at that slope, maybe 10% of all apps would be appropriate for web-based and container-based applications because of the sheer volume of APIs that were available, the sheer volume of native components that are available either through container or through a web-based approach. As the access has expanded, as you've had more sort of capabilities added to the browsers and more capabilities added to the containers, I think maybe it's gone to 20% or 30%, or depending upon what you're trying to do, 40%. Now, there's always going to be sort of gotchas that are going to force you down one architecture or another. Your distribution componentry, right? I need to distribute this via a web page. It's a customer acquisition app. Or I use an app store, and so it needs to be a specific type of app. So there's always going to be those gotchas. Maybe I have a security issue that I need to address, and that's a native only. But I think the web containers and the web browsers have gotten a lot more effective at delivering a decent user experience. Yeah. That said, as that's happened, I think we've seen a lot more divergency in the standards implementation of the different browsers. So when someone says HTML5 or web, they speak of it as it's this monolithic thing. In reality, it's not. We do all sorts of introspection when we look at all the different web browsers and things like that. And there's as much as 50% differential in the implementation of standards from one web browser to the next web browser as you go from device to device to device. So I certainly don't want to paint the picture that it's all rosy and it's a standard, because it's a poorly implemented standard at best.
So Jeff, you brought up security, and in the enterprise, considering my credit card's getting stolen and announced every couple of weeks now.
I just stole it a minute ago.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering, how do you approach that in terms of security? What's your take on app security? I mean, even deploying an app and getting access to its source is a huge point of vulnerability. But I know Sencha's made some inroads in changing how that architecture works.
Right. Well, specifically, we have the one product I mentioned is it's a managed application environment that actually runs on the device, and unlike a consumer browser on any device, all the data for that application is always secure. Plus, there's APIs provided for secure database access, secure file access, and there's even APIs within that runtime where you can invoke other applications securely. Right, so different applications can invoke each other, so you can build much more modular applications.
But is that in the scope of the user who's using the application? Like the logged in user, their security's, I don't know, isolated or whatever?
Yes, it is. So everything's completely isolated from the rest of the device, and it also has single sign-on capabilities, and you can define, an administrator can define a certain application must use a per app VPN to access the application and everything like that. So that's our current take on it. And that the one thing I would mention too is that it actually spans both desktop and mobile devices, that particular product. So from our perspective, we have a lot of customers that use our frameworks for both desktop and mobile. So we have to deal with this situation where you can have a customer that builds a relatively large desktop application, then they want to build a mobile application that's a companion for that. They want to have some level of unity in the frameworks they use, such that they're using a common code base.
Interesting. Michael, so you touched on performance, and you touched on kind of the leaning back to native for IoT-based apps. How have you seen that? I mean, it's almost like every time there's a new wave of computing, you end up going to native first, and then slowly the interpreted technologies kind of bleed in after the performance of the platforms gets better and better. I mean, the phone I carry in my pocket has 400 times what the Apollo mission shipped with, and next year it's going to be 4,000. So how do you all deal with that from a developer point of view? I mean, you all have been in this business a long, long time.
Yeah. Yes, and as we scaled it, like I said, when we scaled down to mobile, from PCs and Macs down to mobile, I mean, the devices, the runtimes on those devices had performance considerations, and also the fidelity of the APIs you're calling. How do I have direct access to the platform APIs and what's underneath? These are smaller devices with smaller sets of APIs. They don't need all of the heavyweight frameworks that we were developing with enterprise applications like big Java stacks and things in the past. But the big thing with mobile is just the user experience. It's a very intimate user experience. Things like scroll performance and list size and capacity and things like that matter. As you said, if somebody doesn't like the app, they're not going to use it, and so there's no point in having it. So we aim at having as thin of frameworks as possible, always over the platform APIs, and putting as little software in between the app and the device as possible, as a rule of thumb. Now, every time we make these transformations from say from PC down to mobile, now we're going from mobile and kind of exploding it out into much smaller devices. These devices really they're very small. A lot of these things are very memory constrained, very footprint constrained. They can't hold large frameworks, additional frameworks on them. And a lot of them are very fixed function as well. So, a particular device might have 6 or 7 different functions and APIs that it's exposing, whether it's a sensor or it's a gadget or it's a vision gear or something like that. So there's really also not a need to put a large stack on top of that. We're really talking about a handful of APIs as we get much smaller. So our aim is to put as little software between the app and the hardware as possible.
All right, let's change questions. Ideal customer and market. Ben.
Our ideal customer, somebody who wants to build kind of what we consider a branded experience. So if you want an app that feels like an iOS app, doesn't look like an Android app, doesn't have any commonality with your other platforms, then Loom is probably not the technology for you. But there's a big class of applications that are very much themed. The Spotify app, the United app, the Costco app. I mean, they're a brand extension. And that's on the enterprise side. On the game side, when was the last time you played a game that used the stock iOS scroll views and things like that? They're all, it's all designed, it's all graphics. And so that's sort of the space that we're focusing. The people who are doing these interactive experiences that have a strong brand and visual identity and want to have really refined interactions that they take from platform to platform. Like this drawing game. We spent a long time getting the drawing right. And when we go to Android, or supposing we had started on iOS, we're not going to redo that. We want it to be the same, or nearly so. And similar for other kinds of games and interactive experiences you might want to have. So that's kind of our ideal customer. To quantify market, whoever wants to buy it. If I had an MBA, I'd probably have a more refined opinion on that. But we're looking for everyone from individuals up to large teams. I built game technology solutions that just me has used, all the way up to teams of 40 and big titles and things like that. And so we really have designed it to scale across that spectrum. So we try to be receptive on that on the market side and focused on the customer side.
Michael?
So our ideal customer is anybody who's building a mobile app. We've got a JavaScript framework that enables you to build an application from a single code base and deploy it as a native app, as a mobile web app, as a hybrid app to any of the popular platforms, iOS, Android, Windows, BlackBerry, Tizen, so on and so forth. We've also got all of the tools you need for your software development lifecycle. So we've got enterprise MBAS, we've got automated testing, we've got integrated analytics, we've got crash management. We've got all those pieces in a single platform. And so what that says is that if you're building one app, you're probably just going to use the development studio, and you're kind of going to feel your way through it. As you build more and more apps, as you build a suite of apps, we've got large cereal companies who have over 120 applications. We've got the largest fast food chains in the world. We've got well over 70,000 applications in the app stores. It's the largest platform in use by enterprise today. And the more apps you build, the more apt you are to need a platform like that covers all aspects of the software development lifecycle. So our ideal customer is someone who has more than 5 apps, and someone who understands sort of the pain of building and maintaining multiple applications on multiple operating systems with multiple data sources. That's our ideal customer. we like to think we're doing pretty well with those guys.
Yeah. Jeff?
Our ideal customer, it's similar kinds of customers. We have a very broad range. We have just our forums have over 500,000 registered users, and they range from individual developers and consultants all the way to people that are on larger enterprise teams. The ideal customer would probably be somebody who's on an enterprise team who's building mobile applications and desktop applications. They need to address a sort of a wide device diversity, I'd say, and across many different industries. Primarily, we have a lot of customers that are in the financial services industries, a lot in industrials, and actually a lot of software ISVs use our frameworks to make their products as well. Also, too, I think that the ideal customer is one that needs a high-quality set of tools, from drag-and-drop visual app builders to testing capabilities, debugging capabilities, a wide range of IDE plugins, and those sorts of things that can allow them to adopt our frameworks and sort of within the sort of construct of their current team processes. That's our ideal customer.
Michael?
Well, I guess our ideal customer is probably not the game developer. It's probably not the developer that's building the standalone app in the app store. Mainly because there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of great ways to solve that problem. Our customers our ideal customer is going to have multiple components to the solution. They're typically going to be an SI or a software consultant building a solution that's a turnkey solution, either for an internal need or as a commercial application that they're going to redeploy on multiple sites. And those applications will typically have multiple clients, so PCs and mobile devices. Now a lot of them are starting to add wearables and sensors and proximity. They'll typically have some type of enterprise database backend. They'll usually need some type of a backend MEP or backend backplane to run the application and connect the different pieces together, and they usually require some type of enterprise connectivity back into some type of mothership or in multiple sites. But it tends to be solution developers building some type of turnkey solution that has those different components. And I guess our key industries would be probably our top customers would be in healthcare. Building healthcare solutions for various different hospitals and healthcare centers. Also, very strong in smart manufacturing, building manufacturing solutions that need to integrate with like robotics and manufacturing equipment. We run the biggest California and Florida amusement parks use our solutions to automate the parks, automate the ticketing, automate the animatronics and the ride control and things like that. It's a pretty wide range. NASA's a big customer. So there's a lot of turnkey solutions, and vendors that are building those turnkey solutions are our customers.
Interesting. So I think one thing that kind of stuck out for me amongst all the answers, and at least what I was thinking in terms of how the choices are made, but it almost feels as though UI guides a lot of those choices in terms of what the customer wants and what the choices. Just quickly, let's go back through and kind of touch on UI and how it affects that kind of market choice. I mean, Ben, for you, the customers are coming because they want a very, very custom.
Right. I mean, in a game, I always like to say, the interface is the experience. No one uses Excel because it's fun to use. They use Excel because they have a business requirement. But if a game had the interface Excel does, no one would play it. The act of using the game needs to be satisfying for it to be successful. And so that really dictates the design of Loom in a lot of ways. We're not about, we do provide a full UI library with scrollers, tabs, buttons, all that sort of stuff. But it's all really skinnable. It's all GPU accelerated so that it's really fast. You give it one texture to draw everything from so that it can just blast that thing out as fast as it possibly can. And those are all ways that the design of the application influences your technology choice. For the kinds of applications you guys are discussing, they'd be like, why do I need it? What's the point? Like maybe I want to set the color of something. Maybe I want to show a business logo at the top. I don't want to, because I'm a big theme park doesn't mean that the user interface for ticketing needs to be a rollicking romp through user experience, right? And
I actually would disagree with you a little on that.
Okay.
I think that no matter what, the user experience needs to be paramount.
I think it needs to be good. I don't know that it needs to be custom.
So here's the thing. What we see all the time is that most users with BYOD are going to walk in carrying a tablet with 40-some applications already loaded to it, a smartphone with the same amount of applications already preloaded to it. If you design a lousy expense management application or a lousy conference room scheduling app, they can go and pick out of the 2-point-some million applications one that does it better, connect it to your back end, and then deliver non-secure data, deliver all sorts of so basically you've wasted any amount of money you've spent on a marginally good UI. But if you focus on UI from the beginning, then people are compelled to use it.
Right.
And then they tell their coworkers about it. And they're not going and looking for something that replaces it that's better than it.
I think that there's definitely truth to that. I think again though there's a distinction between a custom branded UI and a good UI. Like contacts on my iPhone.
Sure.
Great UI, I think.
Right.
Let's assume it's a great UI for the sake of discussion, right? Totally standard widgets,
Yep.
a few
Yep.
custom elements,
Yep.
right? Meanwhile, if I go and I play, Doom, totally custom UI,
Sure.
awesome experience, really wouldn't be the game it is if you were using the standard widget set. But there is a big class of apps where you pretty much can use a standard widget set and build a great experience.
But I think...
But it's hard.
Yeah.
It's not a default.
I was going to say, too often people will default towards what's cheap or what's easy.
Totally.
And what's cheap and what's easy isn't necessarily going to pay off in the long run because someone's going to download what they had anyway and not use your stuff.
I think that's totally true. I think you can create bad UX on any technology.
That's right.
It's really easy to do it.
Yeah, no, agree 100% on that. So.
Yeah.
How does Sencha do it, Jeff? You
Well,
are-
I definitely agree with what you're saying, that the UX is paramount. And I think what our customers tell us is it's probably the number one reason they come to use our frameworks is the rich set of UI components we offer. That, and they also always mention our docs, the fact that it's, one of the things you talked about earlier is how well we sort of support developers with tools and other things. And that's an important thing too. But I think the number one reason is the rich set of the UI components, especially our grid component, which is really high performance, even though it is HTML5, right? So that's the number one thing that attracts them. And I agree that no matter what, you could always create an experience with any technology that could be bad. I think that sort of the design and all the effort that goes into that is super important, no matter whether you're using a completely custom thing or something that's a library.
Yeah.
I think it's
Don't
really important.
don't fire your UX designer.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. There were good ones worth their weight in gold.
Yeah, and I think we'd all agree that just because it's web or native or hybrid doesn't necessarily connote good UI. You can have lousy UI in all of them, you can have good UI in all of them.
But if you use Loom, it's always going to be great.
Michael?
Yeah, well, I think that also part of this is you can design a great UI on iOS, and and then port whatever technology you're going to use to port port that over to Android. That same UI, if it doesn't follow what the user expects on Android, can suddenly become a bad UI, and a bad user experience. And so that's something that that we both struggle with and build a lot of technology and a lot of effort in. Is enabling the developer to build that great UI on iOS, and then when they're moving over to the Android phone, they're getting their tabs in the right space. They get the right back buttons. They get the right experience on that device. And then when that application scales up to a tablet, it makes sense. It's not just a scaled up phone app on a tablet. It's actually a tablet application that has the right kind of left scrolling and things like that. And so that's a big part of making a great UI, and that's one of the things that we put a lot of work into our frameworks, is to both make that as automatic as possible and make that as painless for developers, so that it doesn't matter if they're running on a PC, a Mac, an Android device, or or a phone or a tablet, that they get the right user experience. And then you get into other things of how native is it, how much fidelity, what's the performance like, things like that. But certainly there's certain games. I would certainly say kids, the kids market games. You have to go with a custom user experience, and how much branding you're going to use. That's kind of a business question. We allow both. We allow both native controls and brand and custom skinning through styles. But that's really a business more a business and marketing decision. But developers have to be able to respond to that. You can't just You can't just use what's on hand just because that's what's on hand. I mean, so it's important that the tools are pretty flexible to support both.
And it is interesting too, as well, with the IoT market, that UI is now vibrations, touch, and other things. That whole era, it'll be interesting to see what the standards of interaction for devices that you don't have a screen. You basically are interacting with shaking.
Well,
your wrist.
it's one of our biggest, one of our emerging, and fastest growing areas is developers building UIs for headless UI IoT devices. So the trend is now towards building smaller and smaller devices without even LED or LCD screens on them, and instead having a Bluetooth tethered UI. And you can have that on multiple devices. And that's kind of a new thing that we've really been, we've been building components and framework support for doing this, making this really easy, making the devices discoverable and things like that. But it's actually a really fun part of, of the emerging IoT space.
Yeah. Interesting. So next question is around developer productivity. And I know my work at Adobe was spent focused on developer productivity and, features that speed up kind of time to market. And again, at Sencha, a lot of time was how can you speed up this development process and how can you get my team oriented to move faster. So I wanted to go to Ben. What do you think? Developer productivity.
I like to be productive as a developer.
You do.
And Loom is really designed around that. And if you were going to maybe criticize it, it could be that it's too much tailored to how I like to develop. The big focus we have on our workflow is for live reload. So the idea is Michael was talking about scaling tablet to phone to desktop and having that look right and feel right. And so our theory is the best way to do that is to have the app running on all the devices you care about, maybe an iPhone, an iPad, an Android device, a few different things. And when you push a change, see that change instantly on all those devices. So live reload is a really central part of our workflow. And our theory is that you're better off playing with things on device and interacting with them on device as a designer than it is for you to use a tool to do it. Or even, our framework does address a lot of things like back button management and state and things like that. But, rather than having a framework that's just going to do the right thing as your primary face of attack for that stuff, get it on device, interact with it, see how it feels, and make it really, really easy to iterate. Because the more you can iterate, the better it's going to be, especially in the game space, where the UI is a little less formulaic in a lot of cases. Or at least the UX is, even if the UI elements are kind of set.
So Ben, you're attacking it from the point of view of the faster I can iterate and see the changes that I've just made,
draw something in Photoshop and see it instantly on device. Edit a CSS file, save it, and button changes, and be able to style it differently on different devices, so you can be tweaking your tablet layout and know that it's not going to mess up your phone layout. When Angry Birds Star Wars launched on Android, there was a whole class of devices where they had the small size buttons because they just weren't. It wasn't easy for them to test how their changes played out. So they made some change to tweak it, and you couldn't click on the store on a whole class of devices. And so you have to think, for a game with DLC, how much did that cost them? So we think that being able to iterate and see your changes on device is just, totally central to developing good apps, at least for the class of apps we're targeting.
Michael?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, the more you can make cross-platform. Obviously, we're a cross-platform development tool. We feel very strongly that cross-platform is the way to go, but we don't go all the way down the road of write once, run everywhere, because usually we find that means write once, run poorly everywhere. What we find is you write once and then you customize, and for each platform and for each screen size, and you do some customization. But I think too much is focused on the client-side productivity, and not enough is focused on the things that follow it. I think many developers look at a mobile app as a project, and it's not. It's a subscription. You're subscribing to continually update that application when new operating systems come out, new devices come out, and new capabilities come out. So whatever you can do to optimize the life cycle of that, whether that is automated testing, whether that is cross-platform development, whether that is back-end optimization for mobile, using MBAS, even integrated analytics, so you're not custom instrumenting everything. You have to look at it end to end. I think if you only look at the client side, then effectively you're ignoring 70% of the time it's going to take you to deliver that application.
I definitely agree with that. I think if you look at productivity from a sort of a whole product perspective, I mean, we offer like drag and drop development tools, testing stuff, and all that. And a lot of these things, like you said, decrease that cycle time of the testing. But we also offer a really rich training program for developers to get them up to speed with the frameworks quickly. As I mentioned earlier, the documentation and examples and all that kind of stuff is continuously cited as really big helps for productivity. And in terms of the cycle time, the one area where we see really value in reducing cycle time is in the distribution I mentioned earlier, where if you are packaging things and distributing through an app store, that there's actually alternative ways to distribute that application where you can sort of take out that whole distribution and the whole app store life cycle out of your application, especially if it's an enterprise where you don't really need to go through an app store to reach those consumers. And that's where our space product comes in, because if you're basically deploying a web application in a runtime, and the app is always up to date. There's never any need to redistribute it.
Michael?
I think that for us, the productivity is delivered kind of key and primarily in three different areas. The first is the thing we've been doing for a long time, which is very tight integration between frameworks, the visual development experience, and the native tool chains. And that tight integration really speeds the development cycle, delivers, our customers typically can compete at about 5x productivity just on that basis and develop code a lot faster. The second is the componentization of the frameworks. So our frameworks don't just expose platform APIs in a cross-platform way. They create components that go the extra mile for the developer. So for example, if I'm going to implement a list view, if I'm going to use a platform API to do that, typically I'm going to implement the list view, populate it, then I'm going to add another couple hundred lines of code to add bounce effects. I'm going to add another couple hundred lines of code to add swiping. I'm going to add another couple hundred lines of code to add maybe pull to refresh. And all of those things are time. They also introduce bugs and maintainability. And so whenever we build a component like a list view component, we look at all the things that developers like to do and add to those and build those into the component and then implement it correctly on each different platform. So when you implement a list view out of our framework, it's just a property to turn on bounce effect, for example, that kind of thing. So that's the componentization of the frameworks adds another layer of productivity. And then the third thing is what I like to call N-way cross-platform. Cross-platform traditionally has been very horizontal or two-way. So it's you're doing mobile to mobile or like form factor to like form factor. Qt did this pretty well between two different form factors. But it gets really hard when you want to go mobile to desktop and mobile down to smaller device. And so that's something that we've introduced, something called Fire UI, which is a way to build a user experience that's kind of generic and then inherit from that and then build device-specific UIs from that. And what you're really just doing now is just tuning the deltas between these different, each different platform. So I can start to develop very easily, build the application and scale it up to desktop or scale it down to a much smaller device like a Moto 360 or an LG Watch or a Samsung Gear Live or something like that. And still have the functionality and also be able to peel out functionality I don't need or add in specific capabilities that might be specific to those devices. So those are kind of the areas that we focus on and deliver for productivity. I definitely agree that the back end is very important. So things like out-of-the-box connectivity, out-of-the-box, you can tell what era I come from. Out-of-the-box connectivity to just about any kind of data source or enterprise database. You need to connectivity to cloud services, MBAS providers, things like that. All of those things are important because you could develop the UI really fast and get the clients done really quickly, and then spend 10 times the effort building good connectivity to your enterprise services. So it definitely extends beyond the client.
Thanks for creating the IDE, though. I appreciate that. That was important. Last question, and I think it's probably one of the most important ones, is each of you has a technology roadmap. If you want to share it, feel free. But there's a chart and direction for each one, and you don't have to go into features, but in general direction and heading. I mean, it's hard to walk out into the booths out there to not see the interactions that are happening with remote headless UI and IoT interactions. And it's going to change things. Not that you have to answer in the IoT space, but in your own market, with your own platforms, what are you doing to enhance the technology that you deliver for your customers? Go ahead, Ben.
Well, the two big things on our roadmap are a good vector graphics renderer, because for games, there's just a million things you can do with, stroke shapes, fills, and generating that stuff dynamically. And we're also working on a big upgrade to our physics API, because that's also a big piece that it's great to offload that and have really optimized code. Probably for most of the other apps we're discussing today, that's not a big requirement, but in the game space, it's pretty central. So those are kind of the two big things that we're looking at adding. And then, the overall goal is just to keep iterating, keep shipping apps, refine the tool chain, refine the technology, and make it better and better for everybody. So it's a pretty simple game plan.
Yeah, so we've really three main things we focus on our roadmap. The first is continuing to optimize the client side. So a lot of that is dropping less and less, dropping more and more of the JavaScript bridge out, going direct closer to the metal. Again, from a performance standpoint, it does get better as you get closer. On the API side, what we've noted is, as we've seen this explosion of devices on one side, the explosion of data sources that the average enterprise connects to is dramatically different than it was even 2 years ago. I read somewhere that the average enterprise connects to somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 different cloud services without even knowing it in many cases. So optimizing those connections, enabling the enterprise to quickly build connectors, quickly connect to all sorts of different IoT services, as well as cloud services, as well as the traditional enterprise data sources. That's a huge area of focus for us, and being able to do so repeatedly. So an API builder that lets you basically create APIs, reuse, recreate, reuse, so on and so forth. Reduce, reuse, recycle, all that good stuff. The last piece, and I think the piece that most people miss when they talk about mobile first, which, by the way, I hate that term, but is the analytics side of it. Iterations occur oftentimes in a vacuum. Oh, well, we heard there was a problem here, we read this review here. It's not until you can make data-driven decisions about how your app is actually being downloaded, used, where it's failing, where it's succeeding. When you can make those types of iterations, that's what leads to a 4-star or a 5-star application. If you look at it, the average top-rated application updates every 2 weeks. How are you making the decisions as to what to change, as to what to improve, as to what to remove? If you're not using analytics, then that's a big missing. I call that driving down the 101 using the rearview mirror. So if you're not using those, that's where we're spending a lot of time on our roadmap, at least.
Michael, I know I've been tracking a project from Appcelerator regarding JavaScript to native compilation.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit, just touch on that?
It's TyNext is what we call it.
Yep.
So Titanium Next, and effectively, right now how we do it is we compile in a JavaScript bridge when you build a native application, and all of your JavaScript commands are directly mapped to native APIs. What we're doing instead is removing that JavaScript bridge and mapping them directly within the compiled application. Again, we're trying to remove any performance barriers. We have a gaming company we've been incubating for a while within Appcelerator, and they're the ones providing a lot of the input as to how to do this better. Because to your point, games drive a tremendous performance requirement that I don't think any other application really does. And so if our goal is if we can deliver a quality gaming experience over TyNext, then we've done our job.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. Jeff?
We're making similar investments in terms of simplifying the backend connections. I agree that that's a big problem for enterprises, and often, getting all those APIs ready to go can sort of delay the deployment of mobile applications because you're sitting around waiting for this stuff to exist for the guys to work with. So definitely working hard on that. Automating a lot more testing is a big area of investment for us right now. That could be either unit testing, QA type testing, but also using analytics at the end and testing different theories about which kind of form of an application works best, like A/B testing and gathering feedback on those applications. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been making a lot of investments in the area of application deployment and management as well, because that's something that our customers have become increasingly concerned about. So, being able to deploy the application securely to the most number of people to the most screens possible and be able to manage which groups of users can see which applications and making sure that the data related to those applications is as secure as possible.
Interesting. Mike?
So you guys have mentioned app analytics. Completely agree. It's a very important asset both for the developer and the businesses running the applications. We're building an app analytics framework into the core framework. So a lot of the analytics engines that are out there today that developers are looking at are really looking at over-the-wire API analytics. We're building it into the core framework on device so that we can analyze everything, every button click, every press, everything that's happening on the native client, as well as on the back end. But the biggest area that we're investing in, and I kind of think of it, this is kind of the big bang, is that we've spent the last 5 to 7 years, paring down and shrinking the user experience down to mobile. And we're at a point now where it's really, kind of like the Big Bang, and it's ready to explode back out into much smaller, all kinds of smaller different parts of the user experience. So rather than just bringing it down to a mobile device, we're now, we're going to extend the user experience out to wearables, out to watches, out to sensors and different types of gadgets. And so it's a really exciting time because the user experience is really breaking out. It's out of its shell, out into a lot of different devices. And so what we're doing to support that is today, we provide all of the capabilities to connect to these different devices, but a developer has to learn the API for every device. And we want developers to be thinking about devices as services, just like as we think of web services and software as a service, people should start to think about devices as services. And so we're bringing all of those thousands of different devices, and we'll be adding more every day into the framework so that the developers don't have to learn all these different device APIs. If you want to connect to a Parrot AR drone, we've got, just select the class of device, select the manufacturer, select the device, and you have the API on hand. The same thing if you're going to talk to a health, a weight scale, any type of Bluetooth or Wi-Fi based or internet-based device. The other two areas that we're really focusing on is proximity, very deep integration with things like iBeacon and alt beacons, and proximity support in the frameworks, both between users and the applications and users and beacons, and also between the different components of between the different devices and endpoints that make up the application. We're building also into our backend platform things like device authentication married with user authentication and proximity support back into the enterprise backend. So it's a lot of things that are happening for the next year, really to support this explosion of devices and gadgets and sensors.
Yeah, it is an interesting shift in technology in general. So I wanted to open it up to questions from the audience, and if you can specify the speaker. We actually have the microphone over to the left, so if you want to just go up and ask questions. It's a pretty rare opportunity to get these four in the same room on the same panel, and so I'd love to hear questions from the audience. Go ahead.
What do you think, what are the best arguments to persuade customer to agree for native application instead of hybrid? I mean, non-ideal customers.
Who wants to take that one?
Because usually customer doesn't understand such things as close hardware, abstract, and all that.
So I think the question is, how do you differentiate between hybrid and native? Is that more?
The question is, what arguments
Yep.
to provide to potential customer so that he agrees for native, to pay more for native application?
So if you want native to win, what arguments do you
I
use?
agree that native is better, but how to persuade customer?
Yeah, I think it really boils down to user experience. I mean, whether you're talking about hybrid applications, you're talking about native technologies, the goal is to deliver the best user experience, and native is kind of the gold standard for that. And I think that's really where we want to. We have a weird echo. Where we really want to drive to the customer is the best user experience possible. And then it comes down to how do I develop that? That's really the developer's job to architect out how am I going to do this on budget, be able to outbid my competitor, and deliver it successfully. But I think it really comes down to delivering the best user experience. I mean, if it's a game, then it's about super high performance, low latency experience with being able to use custom graphics. If it's in our environment, if it's a healthcare application and it's a live MRI station that we're doing on, you want the same kind of thing. You want a very low latency thing, user experience, or if I'm doing remote robotics, I don't want it when I move the UI to drive the robotic arm, it's got to be in real time, especially if there's a camera involved and I'm manipulating real objects. Like one of our customers, they fix all the pipelines in the Gulf. So they have submarines that go down and they have a robotic arm and they pick those things up. You can't have any latency when you're picking up those, whether it's a fiber optic cable or you're trying to repair a pipeline.
Now, if your client is maybe a little smaller, not a $1 trillion oil company, a good rule of thumb I found to distinguish is what you said. The branded UI. If it's, I have two customers right now that I'm talking to, two clients. One is doing this marketing handbook application. For them, probably going to do an HTML-based solution. They have some diagrams, some interactivity. It doesn't make sense to rebuild it all in native technology. It's easier to do it as a document. At least that's what we're going to try first. I have another client. They're a nail boutique. They want to do an interactive application to build their brand. For them, I was like, yeah, you're going to go on Loom. We're going to build out a custom UI. 18 to 34-year-old women who are pretending to do their nails on a phone maybe don't care so much about latency and performance, but they do care about the look. And with Loom, we're able to deliver a very specific look and a very specific set of branded interactions. So that's the argument I've used to do the upsell most directly with that stuff.
I usually use one of two arguments. I'll either say, show me a 4 or 5-star app that is web or hybrid based. If that doesn't work, I ask them to list their top 10 applications on their phone and go through and say, well, that one's native, that one's native, that one's native, that one's native. That usually works pretty well.
Or that one used to be hybrid, that one used to be.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Jeff, how do you sell web tech?
Well, I would sell web tech because of its cross-platform properties and the fact that you can probably produce a lot of the sorts of applications we build with a lot lower cost and address a larger number of users across a wide number of devices for more cheaply and quickly. I think that there's definitely advantages to native, being closer to the metal and all that, but we don't make a lot of applications like the robotic control thing for the submarine arm and things like that. So what I'd say is that native definitely has some advantages in certain areas, but I think you start to experience diminishing returns for that in a wide range of applications that a lot of organizations need to build.
This kind of boils down to when we started today, and there was kind of a depends and native, right? And in certain applications, I mean, if they're heavily, that may be a case where the native benefit isn't going to drive the heavy value.
Yeah,
for
it depends.
Right?
It all depends on what the return is on, right?
Right.
Yeah. Just like even in the back end, there's certain applications where you use a SQL database, and certain applications where you do not want to use that. And it's not that SQL databases are good or bad necessarily. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Having done web tech for the past 2 years, I'm biting my tongue right now. So are there any other questions? Yeah.
About web technology. I think web technology, web is standard, so it's come from native. So, and web is evolving HTML5 specification. So how do you follow up HTML5 evolution? I mean, for example, in Sencha, how do you adapt custom element or observing things, those kind of new specifications in your Sencha framework? It can be harmful for your competitors.
Yes, sometimes it can. You definitely have to keep up with all of it. But I mean, we make a lot of investment in continuing to support all the different browsers. That's one of our core value propositions. So our in our R&D area, that's where we spend a lot of time making sure that we can support the most the most of all these components that we can. Now, web technology can move pretty quickly, and sometimes you may not be completely compatible, but that's where we do spend a lot of effort in that. So
Yeah, I know I'm going to come off sounding like a native sort of bigot here, but
that's okay.
I tend to think that folks that view HTML5 as this white knight that's going to come in and save us all from the pain of native development, there's a disconnect there that says at one point in time, Apple and Samsung and everybody else are going to say, like, cool, we've innovated enough, let's just stop and let the standards bodies catch up, and we'll stop adding new sensors and new features and HealthKit and other things like that. And I just don't see that happening. Now, there's always going to be a class of applications that are going to be brilliantly served by web. And there's going to be a large class of applications that are going to be brilliantly served by native. But I don't think that there's going to be one sort of, any point in time, at least in the foreseeable future, I learned a while ago not to say the word never, but in the foreseeable future where the vendors of operating systems and devices are going to stop adding new features and capabilities. I don't see that happening, and I don't see the standards bodies moving quickly enough to catch up.
But then again, you could also argue that using web technology in lots of cases, depending upon the type of applications, can future-proof the app from new devices emerging. And they always say that there's two certainties in the world: death and taxes. I'd assert that new devices are another certainty, right? Just like you said, and new APIs and new whatever, and new native device capabilities. So, it's definitely something we spend a lot of time keeping up with. That's for sure.
Have you seen the range, and it's more to Michael, have you seen the range of applications that, I mean, is my biased perspective, but
Sure.
I keep seeing more application use cases that are falling into the capabilities of web tech in time.
Yeah.
I mean, last year's phone is 10 times slower than this year's phone. So at some point, there's a migration.
Right. Yeah, no, we've definitely seen. I mean, 2 years ago, it was probably 10% of phones were appropriate. 10% of applications were appropriate, and maybe that number is like 30% now, or even 40. And maybe it gets to 50 next year. But I think you're just going to see that pendulum swing back and forth as people expect more from their applications from a UI fidelity standpoint, or from a connectivity standpoint or an interaction standpoint. What is interesting, though, is with a growing class of applications that don't actually involve the user, you may see a reemergence of web-type technologies to deliver that. So there's an entire class of applications right now where the user experience is a push notification. Right? You have entered X. Do you want to buy or see or view or some? Yes. That's the user experience. It's content consumption and a push notification. So in cases like that, the application itself, everything occurs in the back end. Mm-hmm. So the actual client side of the application certainly can be delivered via web technologies. Yeah. Now, whether that's going to be a dominant number of the applications, I think is anybody's guess. Yeah. But the range of applications that are best addressed with a web-based approach has absolutely grown as the sheer volume and audience of applications has grown.
Yeah.
Well, I think that goes to what you were saying. What you started off talking about was the slope. What was it? The slope of interactivity.
Slope of interactivity. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about a very low interactive application in that case, right? Versus extremely highly interactive applications. Probably the most interactive being a game. Right. And that's it's a great gauge to decide how much you need what's going to steer you towards native. I think another thing that we found, we did build some HTML5 and hybrid tools as well, but our main focus is on native. But one of the things that we did find with the hybrid and web technologies was you can't just look at the phone hardware. You have to the phone hardware. It's really the JavaScript environment that the application's running in that makes the biggest difference. There's a lot of talk about HTML5, but what we're really talking about is an application that's running in a JavaScript runtime. And so that can vary from vendor to vendor or between which operating system vendors we're talking about. Which version and things like that. So you have to look at both. You have to look at the hardware platform and the JavaScript runtime environment that the vendor, the OS vendor is putting on that phone.
Questions? last call. I'd like to thank everybody, all of our panelists for coming today, and thank you for coming to the session.
Thanks.